handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being here on the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could join us. Pacific Legal Foundation, as all of you listeners out there know, is my favorite group of lawyers, and they are remarkable people. So I got the distinct honor of having Anastasia Boden with us from Pacific Legal, who has actually been a previous guest on the Denise Simon Experience. And every time we talk to one of their lawyers, it's a fascinating case. And boy, we have one this time. So Anastasia is going to kind of describe it to us. And this one's a kind of a weird one. I'm surprised after all these years it's kind of popped up. But Anastasia, thanks for being here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks for having me.
You know, when it comes to happy hour has been around, what, 35 years or something? I mean, it's been around forever. And happy hour can actually be extended. I mean, sometimes it goes all day, or sometimes it kind of goes, you know, with some contests or all kinds of things, but not so much in the state of Virginia. Anastasia, explain this case. Why in the world is happy hour an illegal thing to be advertised?
Yeah, well, Virginia is a special place when it comes to alcohol laws. They are notorious for being overly strict, and they take an attitude that really harkens back to the Prohibition days. So with regard to happy hour, in Virginia, it's legal to have happy hour, but it's illegal to talk about it. That is, businesses are heavily restricted in the way that they can advertise happy hour. So they can advertise that they have happy hour. They can say we have happy hour 4 to 7, but they can't say the price of any drink or use any terminology that is synonymous with happy hour. They have to use the generic government-approved sanitized phrase happy hour or drink specials. And they also cannot say any names of discounts. So really, they're reduced to just saying simply happy hour 5 to 7. There's no fun allowed, no creativity allowed, and it's simply a restriction on those businesses' right to free expression.
Anastasia, how long has this been around? I mean, is this something that's been around for a long time and all of these restaurants and bar owners just decided they were going to live with it?
Well, it's funny that this law has been around for a while, but in recent years there was a big effort to modernize it because there was a lot of recognition that this is a silly law, that it drives up compliance costs for businesses, it restricts our freedom of speech, it makes advertisements useless to consumers. So there was a big movement to change it. And a few years ago they did, but this is actually the modernized version of the bill. So it used to be you couldn't advertise happy hour at all, and they were lucky enough to squeak through a few concessions. But a few legislators had put their foot down and said, stating prices, that will never happen in Virginia. We're not letting that happen. You know, it's too dangerous for Virginians to be aware of happy hour prices. I guess they might just go crazy and overindulge is the theory. But that's not a good enough reason to restrict the freedom of speech. The First Amendment allows you to communicate legal business practices. These practices are perfectly legal. It's legal to do it. And the government can't stifle that speech just because it thinks it's not good for consumers.
So is this particular lawsuit that you are representing at Pacific Legal, is it going to end up being somewhat of a class action lawsuit, or is it just going to be, the one client, Chef Jeffrey, that you're representing?
So for now, it's Chef Jeff. He is somewhat of a local celebrity around these parts. He has a very colorful personality. He's a really nice guy. He opened his first 3 restaurants before the age of 30, and has been very so he's an entrepreneur and well known, and he likes to poke fun of this law. I believe he sent out a tweet a while ago that said, I regret to inform you that Virginia law prohibits me from telling you that happy hour tonight is from 4 to 7. So, he's a funny guy. But for now, we're representing him, and if we are successful, which, I hope we will be, I think we should be under clear First Amendment doctrine, that will allow all the rest of the businesses in the area to do the same thing. So we don't need a class action just by representing Chef Jeff. We're representing the interest of all business owners.
Now, is this the state, or is this a county kind of issue, or do they have some kind of, I know in Pennsylvania there used to be something called the Liquor Control Board, where you had to go get some kind of a license and all this other stuff. So, are you suing more than one entity, or how's that working?
So we're suing the Virginia Alcoholic Beverage Commission, the Virginia ABC Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, I believe actually is their name. They're actually in the process of switching over from a board to an authority. This is supposed to be, again, another one of attempts of theirs to modernize. So we've sued both entities just to make sure that while they transition, we don't miss anyone. But in any event, it's so funny to see that, again, they're trying to modernize, and yet we don't see much change. They say that they want to modernize, but they can't let go of control over these things. They want to be in control of our vices.
All right, now Virginia obviously is has an awful lot of government citizens in it, federal government citizens that live in Virginia. And, you go across the George Washington Bridge, and right there you're in Virginia. I cannot believe that this law hasn't even been challenged by even some lawmakers. Not that they would, get necessarily involved in state law in this regard, but they might be scratching their head going, really, Virginia? This is kind of a weird deal. I would think that some of those that live in Virginia would say this is stupid. Has any of that happened at all that you're aware of?
Well, you're right that when people find out about this law, when we brought this lawsuit, and people became aware of it, they do think it's silly, and we've had a very good response. But I think the reason perhaps it hasn't been challenged before is that a lot of people just didn't know it was on the books. It wasn't exactly right in front of them. They saw happy hour advertisements. They just didn't realize that they were pretty useless advertisements. They just weren't thinking about it. It never occurred to them that there was actually a state law restricting the business's ability to put the prices on there. So, and then I think maybe another thing is some businesses were flouting it because they were either unaware or, just wanted to advertise their prices. So I think there's just been a lot of unawareness about these laws, and that's why, and that's true of a lot of laws that are on the books. It's like we don't even know. They say that the average person commits 3 felonies a day or something like that because there's so many laws on the books that no ordinary human can be aware of all of them. And so they just go unchallenged for a really long time until a brave business owner steps up and says, hey, I'm not going to take this anymore.
Now, maybe he ought to advertise in some other language, and then they might have an issue. But I guess in this particular case, Anastasia, I'm very curious. How long has this been going on with Chef Jeff?
So this has been going on a while, and to drive the point home about how this really hurts him and hurts business owners, this seems like, kind of a fun issue, but it actually has serious ramifications for business owners because Chef Jeff, for example, has 3 restaurants, one in D.C., one in Maryland, and one in Virginia. And he just wants to advertise the same way in all 3. They have the same menu, basically, 2 of them do at least, and he just wants to put his menus up on his website And the Two Chef Jeff's restaurant, at least, he wants to put them up and they're identical and advertise the same way. But now he can't say the same thing in Virginia that he can say in those other two places. And so he has to change his menu. He has to change his way of doing business. It drives up compliance costs to make sure that nobody from his business is putting signs outside or, doing anything that could potentially violate some of the admittedly vague laws. So it's really, changing his way of doing business. In addition to that, this area is notorious for loving happy hour, and that's one of the best ways for businesses to compete. And he can't do that, and it's costing him precious foot traffic. He wants to bring people into his happy hour, which is, allegedly one of the best in the area, and it's part of the culture of his restaurant. And it's costing him to not be able to attract consumers and to compete through those happy hour prices. So it's been going on for a while, and at some point, I think perhaps he thought that the best that was going to happen was those recent amendments. And when we contacted him, he was ready to get rid of them because he thought that this was really having an effect on his business, and it's a silly, outdated law.
Well, what does the state say? They just don't care? I mean, have you or has he, talked to the legislature? Do they just change something and go, we've updated it and that's just the way it's going to be? Do they feel like there's any kind of cooperation that could happen before this thing just has to go through a whole legal process?
Well, I think that what happened last time is that they're always going to cloak these laws in language about public safety, right? It's always about the children. And so they're going to say, well, if we allow prices to be advertised, that's just going to increase consumption. And as I understand it, I think there were some lobbying groups that were concerned with consumption or drunk driving that had said, you definitely cannot allow prices because it's going to affect these things. But first of all, there's no evidence, of course, that prices lead to increased consumption. And in the several other states where it's perfectly legal to say these things, it's not like we see higher rates of accidents or higher alcohol consumption. But another thing is a lot of these methods these alcohol laws are so tangentially related to those goals that you have to question about whether that is the real goal. So maybe that is the real goal here with this price law, but alcohol laws in general tend to be very anti-competitive, and they're really aimed at keeping out new competitors, new producers of alcohol, craft breweries, new distillers, things like that. And so the state's always going to say, well, hey, it's because it's alcohol, and alcohol is dangerous. I mean, that's basically all they have to say, and people go, oh, you're right, it's alcohol, that's scary. But in reality, what the state's doing is just erecting barriers to competition to keep other people down. So we often see these, the state's always going to come back to us and say, oh, alcohol, look no further, this is a public safety measure. But we're asking the court to see through it and to examine, A, whether that's the real purpose of these laws, and B, whether there's a rational relationship to that purpose. Is restricting speech really going to do any good? Because you can't just censor information without a good reason.
What about retail stores? I mean, often, you might have a beer special. We have this Christmas time packaging of, Budweiser, blah, 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 and it's not but such and such. Does this law reach into the retail side?
As I understand it, no. At least this is a purely happy hour law. There may be another pricing regulation, but I doubt it. And that's because there actually is a Supreme Court case exactly on that point where Rhode Island had tried to say that liquor stores could not advertise the price of any liquor item. And the Supreme Court struck that down and said, hey, there's no vice exception to the First Amendment. You don't get to censor our speech just because it has to do with alcohol. You have no evidence that this is doing any good, so we're not going to let you do that. So there is Supreme Court precedent right on point that says that the state can't do this with regard to liquor stores. And we want to use that precedent now to broaden that up to restaurants when it comes to happy hour. But it's a really interesting question that you bring up, because often you will see differential treatment between restaurants and liquor stores and such, where the fact that these laws are applied to some groups and not others really undercuts the reasoning for applying it to any group at all.
How creative, so this law is really saying they just can't advertise price. They can say happy hour, but you can't be creative in some kind of a slogan of happy hour.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you say, we will give you a happy hour includes, 2 olives in each glass, meaning two for, two free olives in each glass, meaning 2 for 1 kind of thing. I mean,
Well,
is
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I would think under the terms of the statute, no, you can't say you can't say what the discount or special is. You can just say specials. We have specials, period. And here's the time. But you can't say the name of the discount, or, I guess if giving 2 free olives would be considered a discount, but you can't say the name of any discount. And you also can't use any term, because nowadays businesses have all these fun terms for their happy hours depending on what night it is. Our client uses Wednesday wine night. Even the simple term Wednesday wine night is outlawed. It's a crime.
Stop it.
To use that phrase. Yeah, that's crazy.
There's no price in that.
It doesn't matter. You can't use any synonym. You can't. It's not just that you can't say the price. You also can't say any drink specials, and you can't say any synonyms for happy hour. I mean, you couldn't even say discounted drinks. You have to say happy hour or drink specials in the time, and you can't use any creative phrasing.
So this really is restricted speech. I mean, not only are they not saying you can't use these prices, you can't even be creative, which is one of the calling cards of any bar, grill, or restaurant ever across the entire country.
Yeah, that's right. That's how they compete, right? Is by enticing consumers, by coming up with cool, interesting deals and fun names that people want to go, whether they want to go to. So it's hampering their ability to run their business.
So Chef Jeff has got a restaurant. So can he say, get a free prime rib with your expensive drinks? Go the other way? Can he give away the prime rib and charge for the martinis?
That's a great question. I'd love to. Maybe if we get as far as depositions in this case, I'll ask the members of the Virginia ABC in deposition whether, because it's hard to tell. The law is a little vague. All we know is that it's very restrictive. I don't know if that would be outlawed. My guess is yes. I mean, why not? That could be considered a discount on drinks, a free prime rib with your drinks.
Anastasia, so are in your time representing Chef Jeff, do you get to kind of go around to some other bars and restaurants and ask some of those owners or see what it is that they're doing? Or are they just not being creative either and they're just kind of living with it? Or, do you get to, I guess, ask them some hard questions such that it's affecting their creativity as well as Chef Jeff's?
Yeah, I mean, you see, it kind of runs the gamut in Virginia. You see some businesses clearly are complying and others who are not, but we've gotten a really good response to the lawsuit. Plenty of people have come out and said, yes, this is silly, we agree, this hurts us too. So it's gotten a good response. Because, I mean, how do you defend something like this? In order to defend a law like this, you really have to sort of have that mentality of the Prohibition days, that there's a role for government in controlling our vices and in determining how we get to speak and micromanaging our businesses. It's just so paternalistic, and it's been 100 years since Prohibition ended, so laws that harken back to Prohibition attitudes also need to end.
Well, what's remarkable here is that anybody that goes to any place where there is a chance to spend money, that consumer is always going to look at the price. Always. If you've got a sign up that says 20% off, you got a sign up that says clearance, you got a sign up that says, all of our hors d'oeuvres are half off. Those are incentives. So from a consumer standpoint, they're cheating a decision maker, correct?
Oh, that's right. I mean, that's the whole point of happy hour. I mean, that's like you said, the first thing that consumers look at, really, in any business, and with regard to any product, price is one of the main things that people want to know. It's one of the most vital pieces of information to consumers, and so it's ridiculous that we should treat alcohol as some sort of contraband, scary thing. We're not talking about some crazy illegal drug. It's alcohol. It's been around for a long time, and you don't need to treat it like heroin. It's something that you can expect consumers to be reasonable about, even if they're exposed to the price. And anyway, if you want to control unreasonable behavior, then you just enact laws that actually control unreasonable behavior.
How long has the Virginia Beverage Control Board thing been around? Is this some kind of I'm not even sure that having a beverage control board in itself is legal, constitutional or whatever.
Yeah, it's been around for a while, and it is very common that states did this after Prohibition. Even though Prohibition was lifted, they went ahead and, some states full-on assumed authority, full control over liquor sales in the states. Like Pennsylvania, for example, if you want to buy liquor, you have to go to a state-owned liquor store. They have a monopoly over liquor sales. Others, like Virginia now, they have 3-tier laws where so that was their way of controlling sales of alcoholic beverages, where they said that any producer had to go through a middleman that would then give it to a distributor, and by separating out these 3 things and introducing inefficiency, they said that would be a good thing that would curb drinking and curb bad incentives to basically curb competition, which they thought was good. So states really came in after Prohibition in many states and assumed a lot of control over liquor sales, and that's certainly what happened in Virginia, and that's why we have this sort of old, antiquated system with this board that has assumed all authority over alcohol in the state.
I know in some states, you have to buy a license in order to serve, and beer and wine is one price, which is significantly cheaper than alcohol is to have that kind of a license. So it appears that in Virginia, it's all lumped into one, correct?
Yeah, I know that I think in Virginia you have to get about 10 licenses, depending on what you want to do. And what's interesting, like if you want to be a craft brewer, for example, you need to get a craft brewer's license, you need to get a distributor's license, you need to get a tasting room license, you need to get, a business license. I think there's something like 7 licenses you have to get because we just regulate the heck out of these businesses. And, with regards to these pouring licenses, they're just expanding and expanding. I saw in one state they're considering now expanding that to private property, such that if you have a wedding on a piece of private property now and you're going to serve alcohol, you need to get a pouring license for the day. Yeah, because they just, the licensing growth, it just naturally tends to expand. It enriches the government, and it ends up hurting a lot of us, people who just want to have a wedding on a private piece of property. People who are tailgating now, they might have to get a pouring license for the day.
Some states are even talking about getting rid of tailgating altogether. It is nuts. I would think certainly in this day and time, that's kind of a rhetorical statement I was about to make. Fascinating case here you got here, Anastasia. This case is just kind of in its infancy with Pacific Legal.
Pardon? Oh yes, we just filed it. We're waiting to hear back from the government to see what they'll do. And the wheels of justice are slow. It often takes a lot of time to get through these congested courts that are overburdened. But, in this case, maybe there's a possibility that they'll go ahead and rescind the law because it's so obviously unconstitutional and just flouts Supreme Court precedent with regard to the First Amendment. So we are very hopeful that we can get something going for Chef Jeff soon.
Well, thanks to Chef Jeff. I think that, if with your help that you guys will prevail and make an awful lot of consumers and businesses quite happy in the state of Virginia. And maybe make this Virginia Beverage Control Board thing kind of fade away. But, ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Anastasia Boden, and I would encourage you to go over to pacificlegal.org because the case is there in description and their filings. And so, Anastasia, good luck with this. It'll be a fun one to watch. And thanks so much for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
let the restoration begin.
Donald Trump came to Washington vowing to drain the swamp and make government work for the American people. But the swamp creatures in D.C. aren't going down without a fight, and the deep state is determined to overturn the election and keep their gravy train rolling. In these turbulent times, it's critical for patriots to stay engaged and be prepared to defend this president. You can stay up to date on Trump's battle to make America great again by listening to America First Radio with Jim Dawes each weeknight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Liberty Feed.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You cannot retreat to your safe spaces. There are no therapy poodles allowed, especially when facing the truth. And that's just how we like it. Straight, hard, conservatarian talk, on the rocks, no chaser. Served up on the Adrian Slade Show. Small, limited government, constitutional conversations, exclusively on Talk America Radio. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on Talk America Radio Liberty.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I kicked the shins of an old friend of the Denise Simon Experience, and someone that I've collaborated with a little bit. It's been a long time, and that is Charles Ortel. He is a tenacious, and I would say tenacious, boundless financial expert, retired investment banker, and he has been keeping very, very busy of late, I guess for the last several years, on charity fraud investigations, especially when it comes to all things Clinton. So with that, Charles, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, it's great to be back on with you, Denise. How are you doing?
Nice, good, and I know that you are. Nice to hear your voice again.
Likewise.
Let me start off by saying that Jeff Sessions has named a prosecutor. Well, no, let me say it another way. He's named another lawyer who does have prosecutorial authority by the name of John Huber. And it looks like he will delve somewhat into the Clinton charities, and I say that in a plural sense. But what's kind of interesting is we already have, I would say, a sizable file at the FBI on all things Clinton charities. Did I get that right?
You did. So the story here, and I guess I saw some of this when I started on this. You're right, Denise. It was in February of 2015, so it's now 3 years of this. I quickly figured out this was a fraud and the largest unprosecuted fraud in world history. And so the question, what intrigued me about this was not so much putting dimensions around the size and consequences of the frauds, but rather seeking to understand why it is that so many government authorities, so many state governments that regulate these charities, the federal government, foreign governments, why so many of these governments have refused to do anything about it. And, I honestly think that when we think about the president's current political position right now, where he's, the other side, the resistance is, if Trump handed every member of the resistance $1 billion each, they'd still be furious with him. But, and then on his base, many in his base are not all that happy with some of his recent decisions. And one bipartisan issue that really would unite this country is to focus upon the degree to which charities like the Clinton Foundation, like the large endowed educational institutions, like Media Matters, which is not really a charity, it's an action organization masquerading as a charity, how these institutions are corroding the public trust, but worse, how they're corrupting America and governments. I mean, when you have a charity like the Clinton Foundation, which is a full frontal fraud, when you really look at, you don't forget the marketing brochures, get a lawyer to look at the actual registered name of these entities. Get a lawyer to tell you the importance of articles of incorporation, how they define the true scope of a charity. Get an accountant to tell you what a real audit looks like as opposed to the fake audits that the Clintons have been passing off around the country, and then get steeped in the various state laws in this country that regulate charities. And these state laws are super strict in places like New Hampshire and South Carolina. I could go on and on and on. And, the only thing that has allowed this fraud to fester, metastasize, and spread through, infect the whole country, has been that Republicans in key states, when they had a chance to do something about this, didn't do anything about it. And people like Xavier Becerra out in California, the Attorney General there, and Eric Schneiderman here in New York, these are people who are disgracing themselves by allowing epic frauds against their own taxpayers. I mean, when you have a charity that doesn't keep track of its true expenses and true inflows, what you can do is you can manufacture tax deductions for crooked donors that cost a state treasury a lot of money. In addition, a false front charity like these Clinton Foundation charities should be itself taxed as a corporation. It should pay corporate income taxes. And the donors who actually may have given money should not be allowed to get the tax deductions in states like California and New York and others where tax rates are very high, where the cost of government is very high, where deficits are yawning and escalating. So, this is, I forgive Donald Trump for taking time on this because it is very complicated, and I myself have had, difficulty following the full contours of it. But, President Trump has been in office for over a year. He finally does have people installed in key positions, U.S. attorneys and otherwise. I believe he's got somebody nominated to go, or at least headed towards running the IRS and cleaning that swamp out. And this is, no serious thinking person is in favor of a charity fraud, that you would, go around the world and say that you're raising money for desperate HIV/AIDS victims or earthquake victims, people like that. And then instead of having that money actually reach the victims, you'd skive it off and use it to enrich yourself or fund political campaigns or just have a big old rollicking party as you travel around the world in private jets. That's not something that any thinking person is in favor of. And it is also something that has gone on now for over 20 years, involving people with, who are, you may dislike the Clintons, or I may dislike the Clintons, but you have to admit that certainly Bill is highly intelligent, possibly Hillary is highly intelligent, maybe Chelsea's highly intelligent, and the people around the Clintons are not stupid. So they can't say that they did this by accident. This is a complex fraud, and it's the kind of thing that the FBI warns about on their web pages. If you look back, just punch in FBI fraud, charity fraud warning signs. You set up a charity that has a name that sounds official, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. And then, Bill is somebody who split hairs over the meaning of the word is. And then you have minions set up charities where the names are slightly similar, or slightly different. So instead of calling it the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, you call it William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. You leave out the, which is a crucial distinction. That then allows you to set up bank accounts in multiple jurisdictions, use different addresses, and when the money comes to the bank account, because this thing is not audited, it's have never had any independent trustees with power, you're then able to divert money from as it comes towards the foundation. And this, this is an example that has gone on way too long. I've got to believe that the top forensic accountants of the FBI see this clearly. I've published extensively on my website. I have been doing podcasts, that run about 2 hours each for free. I think there's close to 100 hours of podcasts taking people through chapter and verse on this. And we have a crucial tax deadline here, April 15th, 2018, coming up. This is a time to send a message to the people who would enable this Clinton Foundation fraud conspiracy that when you do this to this degree, your ticket gets punched. We have Corinne Brown down in prison, a former Florida congressperson, 71-year-old African-American lady, $800,000 charity fraud over many years. She's in federal prison for 5 years, and the Clintons are swanning around getting gigantic book deals, maybe movie deals next, fancy speech payments, living high on the hog, not a care in the world. This is not right.
Clearly, we have more than one Clinton Foundation. But what is particularly interesting is they, I would assume, are using an accounting firm to, certify the balance sheets and the pay-ins and payouts, correct?
Correct. So the way charities work, you cannot fob the problem off on professionals and say, I'm the trustees, but I'm too important to care about. No. The trustees have the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that they discharge their duties of care, that is, they take the time necessary to run this thing in compliance with all laws. Obedience, they have to obey all laws, not some of the laws, and not only the laws that they like. And they have a duty of loyalty, which means that if the interests of the charity come in conflict with your personal interests, you have to set your personal interests aside. You have to declare your conflicts. In certain cases, you have to refrain from voting. So no, you can't say, well, some accounting firm got it wrong. It's your responsibility to make sure the numbers are right. And in any case, when you work with an accounting firm, as I had done during the course of my career, you find out that when you hire an accounting firm to do an audit, you, the person hiring the firm, make representations to the auditing firm about the quality of the disclosures. So you can't fob this off on somebody else. No, and you also can't, it's very dangerous when people start enforcing the laws. It's very dangerous to be soliciting money on the basis of publicly available disclosures, which are false and materially misleading. False because they're incorrect, materially misleading because they omit key disclosures that would change your mind if you knew about it. These are called deceptive practices, and depending on the state inside the United States, the penalties can be onerous, not simply for collecting money and skiving it off, but for asking for money. Each solicitation, each request, particularly if you use the mail, if you use phones, each false and materially misleading request using, let's say, the telephone or the mail is one serious criminal count.
Charles, so when it comes to the state's attorneys general, you mentioned Eric Schneiderman and Javier Becerra, New York and California, respectively. Have they just chosen? I mean, they would have to have a file. Have they just chosen to add to the file, but that's all they do is just kind of keep it in a file drawer and ignore this? Are there some kind of other quid pro quo things that you may be seeing some symptoms of, such that the state's attorneys general have decided to not pursue? Do you have a gut feeling on any of that, Charles?
Yeah, I do. So I think the way this works is that government officials will say, and in some cases they're correct, that all of their staffs are overworked, and in particular, attorneys general, state attorneys general, are chasing straight up mobsters and criminals and people whose actions may in fact harm or even kill people. So at the it's not necessarily placed to the top of the heap to focus on charities, but you say with Schneiderman. Schneiderman is a politically ambitious person. He and Trump do not have a good relationship. I mean, that's been the public feuding over that, but to say the least, right? And you raise a good point. Schneiderman went after Trump prior to the election. Normally, you don't announce, an investigation and announce the seriousness of potential charges before you make the charges, et cetera. And Schneiderman grandstanded before the presidential election over Trump University, which was an entity that did not apparently file its paperwork properly in New York State. That is nothing compared to what the Clintons have done in New York State, and indeed with the university. States like New York and other states that have old famous universities in them tend to care very deeply about whether you use the word university or college in a solicitation request for a charity, and you've got to jump through hoops to do that right. The Clintons still are operating something called Clinton Global Initiative University using a joint venture partner. It's a for-profit, in my judgment, fraud called Laureate. And they haven't filed any of the paperwork properly on that. Moreover, Bill Clinton has collected $17.6 million for part-time work at this for-profit fraud. It's just, and Schneiderman could talk all he wants about Trump and this and that. Whether you're on the right or you're on the left, if you're going to have strict charity laws and high income tax rates in your state, you damn well better enforce the charity laws properly. And there's, as you say, Denise, there are multiple Clinton charities. It's not just the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, which ate a hand grenade on November 2nd, 2013, when they changed their bylaws. This is a public charity that is supposed to stand in the shoes of government and cannot be controlled in a family, but they changed their bylaws illegally, November 2nd, 2013, tried to hide that from the public, notified New York on June 27, 2017, that they'd vested control of this thing in the hands of the Clinton family for their lives. You can't do that, but they did do that. So why don't you do something about that, Eric Schneiderman? What about you, Xavier Becerra? Same thing for you. You still don't have a filing out in California of this. And up in New Hampshire, that's a state now controlled by Republicans at the AG and governor level. New Hampshire has super strict laws that require you to have, the foundation must have 5 directors, none of whom are related by, at least 5 directors, none of which are related by blood or marriage. And the Clinton Foundation did not have that condition, has never had that condition proper. And in particular, after November 2nd, 2013, they're in deep trouble for that. they're in deep trouble for what are called transactions. They should be in deep trouble for transactions of a pecuniary interest. That's where trustees or directors or people, principals in the organization, enter into transactions in total during the year whose value exceeds $5,000 or more. There are very strict rules about approving those type of arrangements, which have been endemic in the Clinton Foundation entities and have never been appropriately disclosed, and which the Attorney General of New Hampshire can void. I mean, so it's time. If the IRS is not going to move, if the FBI is not going to move, it's time for these states to do something about this.
None of the Clinton charities, plural again, are eligible for FOIA, correct? Freedom of Information Act?
I'm not an expert on FOIA, but actually, any charity, any 501c3, has an absolute obligation under existing laws to provide the complete correspondence file to any member of the public, the complete correspondence file between that charity and the IRS. We requested that. We then, a serious group then made a formal suit to get the records from the IRS and was turned down by the IRS under the Obama administration.
So do you kind of launch it again, that request?
Well, it's been publicly reported that the FBI has been looking at this since the 4th of January, 2018. You mentioned there's something called the FBI Vault file, which is online, and the FBI runs it. And there are records of a FBI, they're redacted, but they're records of an investigation that occurred in 2001 through 2005 of the William J. Clinton Foundation under the Bush administration, when the fraud escalated in vast scope and complexity. But somehow the FBI couldn't catch it. Now, who was leading the FBI back then? Bob Mueller. Who was leading this investigation for justice? Jim Comey. Who was in charge at the Justice Department for deciding which tax frauds get prosecuted? Rod Rosenstein. So do we believe that maybe there's a tremendous set of conflicts of interest now with this Mueller investigation that why was Rosenstein selected? Why did he in turn pick Mueller? How can these people fairly investigate Donald Trump when they must simultaneously be trying to cover up their gross errors and failing to go after the Clinton Foundation from 2001 to 2005 for obvious frauds? It's obvious in the public domain. Imagine what the FBI actually had in that full file that's on the FBI Vault.
All things actually began, and I'm happy to be wrong on this if I am, with Clinton charities in Arkansas. So that appears to be the launch point of where things began, took off, and then spread out from there in many different lanes. Where is the Arkansas Attorneys General?
Okay, so the Arkansas Attorney General is a lady named Leslie Rutledge, and the situation is she's a Republican. The governor's a Republican as well. The situation in Arkansas is profoundly difficult, and the reason for that is that this charity was established October 23rd, 1997, when Bill was still President of the United States. They have never subsequently filed any state filing that is accurate. They use the wrong name. The real name of this thing was originally the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. No Inc., but the was part of the name. The real address of it was 5604 Hawthorne Drive, Little Rock, Arkansas 72207. Okay, but instead of using the correct name and the correct addresses, and instead of filing an initial tax return, which they were required to do for the period October 23, 1997 to December 31st, 1997, they failed to file a tax return for that. And then they subsequently compounded their errors. All the while, Bill was President of the United States. Bill was, in this time, 20 years ago, the Monica Lewinsky fraud was, scandal was exploding, and Ken Starr was getting aggressive, and it was a tremendous, tumultuous, messy time. during which none of the filings were properly done. None of the conflicts were explained. In the first full year, there were 3 directors of this thing, a man called Skip Rutherford, another man called David Pryor, who had been, I think, a senator and a governor of Arkansas, and Vernon Jordan's wife, Ann Jordan. None of the conflicts are explained in that first year when David Pryor became and led the second presidential legal expense trust that was trying to pay off the mounting legal bills for the various scandals. That's not disclosed and should have been disclosed. Ann Jordan was, I think, co-chairman of the second presidential inauguration committee that raised a lot of money but didn't spend it all. And that entity, I think, was the largest donor to the Clinton Foundation in 1998. But it didn't explain at the Presidential Legal Expense Trust level the conflict involving Ann Jordan and vice versa at the library. There's never been a full accounting for that second Presidential Legal Expense Trust. And, when you get into the weeds, as I now am doing with you, there's a question. The first set of questions I focused on were, is it a validly organized and operated charity? But there's a bigger set of questions. Is it even a validly organized corporation? And lawyers I deal with who are expert on this say this isn't a corporation. This is what's called a formless aggregation of individuals who, they show up in one state and they say, hey, we're raising money for AIDS. And then they get a pile of money and they may or may not use that money for AIDS. They may or may not take it back to Arkansas. They may or may not use it somewhere else. And they just have been doing this. They've been a traveling carnival. They do this around the world. Bill's a great talker. He's got lots of friends. And, people who understand fraud look at this and they say, actually, Bill's kidding himself. We'll get involved with this. We'll give him a bit of money, and then we'll exact our pound of flesh when we want approval on an arms deal, when we want, the prosecution in the FBI and, Department of Justice or elsewhere to look the other way. We'll pull some levers. And, so fraudsters are delighted to see a powerful family like this, a dynastic political family, get involved with global fraud. It's grist for their bill.
We're going to come into a break here, but I'm going to give the warning that I want to talk about statute of limitations. I want to talk about how the charities are paying each other, and how RICO would necessarily play into some of this. And before we go into the break, Charles, would you share your web address so everybody can kind of keep up with the work that you're doing?
Sure. I'm really creative. I use primarily Twitter, just my name, at Charles Ortel with a C and the O uppercase. And then my website is just my name, charlesortel.com. I, however, do a podcast Sunday with Charles. It's if you Google that, you'll see that we do them on YouTube, and there's quite a few of them now. I do that with an outfit now called Crowdsource the Truth 2.0, and those would be the principal ways you could follow me.
You are working hard at trying to get this out there, and it's remarkable that we don't have a Reuters, that we don't have an MSNBC, we don't have a CNN. We don't have a New York Times. We don't have a Washington Post. We don't have an LA Times. We don't have a Chicago Tribune. None. I haven't seen any of these report about any of these Clinton charities in quite some time. So thanks, Charles, for trying to keep it out there. But stay with us because we're coming into a break. We'll be back with you shortly, ladies and gentlemen. See you in just a few minutes.
Handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya. Over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya. Out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 Tree 5, 9er 21, grid to Mark, Mike Charlie, 47 Tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness, Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And we're back with you, ladies and gentlemen, on the Denise Simon Experience. We've been speaking with Charles Ortel, who is a aggressive pit bull when it comes to being a financial expert investigating charity fraud. And he is a retired investment banker, so he gets to look at numbers and filings and documents all day long. And the matter of the Clinton Foundation's scandal has not gone away, nor should it. We're just trying to figure out how come it doesn't seem to be getting any traction where it should be at the federal level and at the state level. So, Charles, thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience and for your remarkable attention. It's endless attention to this whole scandal.
Well, thanks so much for having me back on.
Before we went to break, I was kind of teasing that we need to talk about statute of limitations. When it comes to charities and fraud, is there a statute of limitation?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, but the way lawyers look at this who are dealing with me is they say, now, first of all, it'll be more than a bit ironic if in the end what catches the Clintons is a conspiracy of their own making. Because you remember that Hillary was...
Oh, yeah, everybody else, yeah.
Huh?
That it's everybody else that is at fault and not the Clintons.
Well, Hillary was the one who popularized the phrase "the vast right-wing conspiracy" while leading the vast, crooked conspiracy. It's not a question of political persuasion. I think progressives and conservatives alike, and even non-aligned people, loathe those who would practice charity fraud. So, a conspiracy, the statute of limitations, I believe, on a conspiracy is triggered when the conspiracy ends. So, if the conspiracy is ongoing, I think that they would have a problem with that. On the narrow issue of the way in which charities, in theory, on paper, are regulated, when you make an application to the IRS for federal tax exemption for a nonprofit corporation or association or other entity, on the information in that application must be true and complete. It can't be part of the truth. Anything that's material, anything that they should know about, you've got to disclose in that application. On the basis of the materials provided to the IRS then makes to you a conditional federal tax exemption and reserves the right at any future time, if it discovers, because it can't regulate, there are not enough people in the IRS charity department to regulate more than 1 million charities. If at any future date they discover that you veered materially away from what you said you were going to do, and if you blow your charter, if you make all kinds, they have a right to go and retroactively revoke your federal tax exemption back to the date when you went off kilter. In this case, I would argue that date is October 23rd, 1997. But, if you wanted to be charitable, you could say it was maybe January 31st, 2001. But, the way I look at this, I think the IRS has the absolute right here to reach a determination that the charters for basically all of these charities should be retroactively revoked. That would then trigger massive corporate tax bills at the Clinton charity level. It would also yield recoupment of the value claimed of donations made to the Clinton charities from individuals and from other foundations who, if they were big like the Gates Foundation, they've given almost $150 million to these frauds. The IRS would have the latitude to go after the Gates Foundation and say, you didn't just do this once by accident, and you're not like any old charity. You're a big charity with lots of resources. You're supposed to be a pretty smart bunch of people. You didn't do this, 100 times because you didn't see some benefit into it for yourselves. Now, you either come clean and explain why you're doing this, or we're going to shut you down, in which case you could levy a gigantic, and by that I mean, $10+ billion fine against the Gates Foundation and other large donors that have been enabling this fraud. So, I think I'm pretty sure the last time that charity, the world of private foundations was regulated or re-regulated was 1969. So we're now 50 years in almost, And the apparatus that should regulate these large private foundations, including the Harvards, the Yales, and others that have been enabling the Clinton Foundation frauds, it needs to be brought into the 21st century. And we need to have, some real discussion about whether, a foundation like the Gates Foundation or a university like my alma mater, Harvard and Yale, whether these are true charities or whether they're vanity and personal enrichment exercises. And if they're vanity and personal enrichment exercises and churning out professional credentials and trying to build a gigantic hedge fund to support, these universities so that professors can make a lot of money, and so, only the best and well-connected people can get into these places, then I think we need to have some real changes made in this. Why should a place like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or whatever, why does it deserve to have a tax exemption? Princeton doesn't have professional schools the way Yale and Harvard have, business and medical and law schools that are enormously profitable. We need to have discussions about that. And then on Gates, and others, the Rockefeller Foundation, these other big foundations, the reason I believe they were giving money to these Clinton frauds is because they felt, they'll have some protection.
Charles, does RICO play any role in any of the Clinton Foundation orbit?
I would, again, I'm not a lawyer, I would guess. I'll tell you where I think one area that we haven't really nailed them on quite, comprehensively yet is the whole area of postal fraud. So when you think about running political campaigns, it's expensive to buy media time, it's expensive to do these mailings, but charities can get discounted mailing rights. And I don't know that there's been close enough inspection of exactly what sort of discounted postal rates the Clinton Foundation claimed, where they mailed from, and we've contacted the Postal Service, and we've gotten word back that their authority to use discounted mail was revoked at some point in 2004. Why did that happen?
Oh.
And so, RICO is something, again, I'm not a lawyer, I certainly don't have great knowledge about criminal law, but I would guess somebody like a Rudy Giuliani or maybe this person, whether it's Mr. Huber out there in Utah or Cody Highland out there in Little Rock or other U.S. attorneys, would look at these facts, and I think they would probably get much more quickly to the place where I am, which is to say, not only has this slew of fake charities never validly been authorized to solicit and operate in the many states and 4 countries where it has operated, but this thing isn't really even a corporation. It doesn't stand, therefore would not have the protection of any kind of, indemnities or immunities or whatever. This is a bunch of people who decided that no one would ever check, what was really happening. That's the title of, I guess, their next book. Or maybe the next book would be somebody unfortunately checked what happened. But, and they just went off and they said, look, we're just trying to change the world for the better. We'll fly around the world. We've been public servants. We'll land in some place. We'll put up a tent. We'll give a speech and throw a shindig and ask for money, and the money will be put to good use, except nobody really knows how much money was actually raised or what happened to it. And, it's like a traveling carnival. And it's got to stop. I mean, this what started as a tiny fraud. I mean, when you go into the actual books that you can find, which I have found, this thing has never gotten a legally compliant audit. I mean, the auditing firm that they selected, the trustee selected, is something called B as in boy, K as in king, D as in dog. And they didn't even manage in the early years to use the correct name of the entity when they provided an audit, and it wasn't an audit. The first years, the key years through 2004, when they put up the campus in Little Rock, they used, by their own admission in these documents, which are hidden on the Clinton website, they're not on the website, but you can get them in various states, the key documents flatly state these financial statements are not prepared in accordance with accounting principles applicable in the United States. I mean, you can't do that. And without giving a long treatise on the defects in the numbers, there's a crucial set of tables which are called cash flow statements that tell you how much cash really moved in the year. They omitted them. You're not allowed to do that. New York law, California law, other states strictly require you've got to be fully compliant with all applicable accounting guidelines, and one of them is having those cash flow statements. Without the cash flow statement, you can't see what I see, and that is that a minimum of $64 million was stolen from the Clinton Foundation in 2004. So, I mean, Another thing that's really a shocker since the last time we talked, we managed to get a copy of the agreement that the Clinton Foundation entered into with our National Archives on the 18th of November 2004. This agreement is riddled with false declarations, and it shows, when you look at the actual facts, that the Clinton Foundation actually defrauded. The day that Chelsea Clinton turned the keys of the Clinton Library over to the National Archives, there was a ceremony, it's recorded, as she was doing that, the Clintons were defrauding we the people. The entity that gave the, in theory, donation was not a lawfully organized or operated charity. Therefore, it couldn't make a compliant gift to the National Archives. Yet it turned this long-term agreement over to the National Archives and saddled we the people with a liability. And, again, on Hillary, when she was running for president, and people would brag and say, this person is one of the smartest lawyers in America 20 years in a row. Bill was a Rhodes Scholar, taught at law school, by all accounts is pretty smart. Don't tell me this happened by accident. Just don't even try.
Wait. Why would the National Archives even be involved with a charity?
That's the way this works. So what a presidential library is supposed to be, there's a special statute.
Oh, okay. That's right. All right, the presidential library. All right, I get it. Yeah. Okay.
It's important to dwell on it a little bit, Denise, because unlike other charities that don't have special statutes dealing with them, there's two sets of statutes that are, at first blush, that come to light that are relevant. One is the Presidential Libraries Act of 1955, amended in 1986, and the other is the Presidential Records Act of 1978. Basically, when a president is in office, the papers that are created or received by the president and the top team are at all times the property of we the people. Okay, they are defined as presidential records. When Nixon left in disgrace, presidential records were not at that time actually defined. So the 78 Act defined them. And what the Libraries Act is supposed to do is merely, if private donors want to raise money to erect a facility that they either give free and clear to the National Archives, which the Clintons did not do, or they give a partial interest to the National Archives, there's special rules that apply to that transfer. And boiling it down, if you're not going to give something free and clear, then the entity that gives the donation at the time of the donation on November 18th, 2004, had to, in the Clinton case, be a validly organized and operated charity, which it was not. And so the gift, you look at this, the gift is wrong. What would happen if you unwound all this? Well, the papers have always been the property of we the people. Nothing really would change there unless we can show that the Clintons destroyed presidential records, in which case there should be liability for that. The facility has already been paid for. It's up and running. The ripple problems include that they entered illegally into arrangements with the University of Arkansas to create the Clinton School of Public Service. All kinds of problems with that. So, and all kinds of exposure for the University of Arkansas Foundation and the University of Arkansas, because they are both charities in Arkansas. All kinds of exposure for Walmart Foundation, for some big Arkansas donors. All kinds of exposure for Stevens Inc., which is an investment bank that sold debt to put this mess together. All kinds of exposure for the people who may have illegally profited in the redevelopment of North Little Rock and Little Rock, knowing that this complex was coming together. So there's a large degree of embarrassment and, jail time and fines and punishment. But I think, to look on the bright side of all this, this could well end up serving as an excellent test case, helping people understand of what you do not do when you try to set up a charity. Mm-hmm. By fully fleshing it out and saying, these are all the many ways. Look at all the firms that did this wrong. You have the accounting firm, BKD, and other ones, Price Waterhouse, many other firms are involved here. You have Williams & Connolly, a prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C., at the center of this, and many other law firms bless this. You have big-name trustees, Terry McAuliffe, other people like that. Lots of big, well-heeled donors, billionaires have given money to this thing. So a lot of people will eat a lot of egg on face. And some people, if there's going to be justice in this country, I used to laugh at Maxine Waters saying that, justice is administered unfairly. But now you see, this woman, Corinne Brown, former representative, She was indicted 3 days after Comey let Hillary off the hook in July of 2016, and she was swiftly prosecuted and incarcerated.
That was fast. That was absolutely fast with her.
Right, and meanwhile, the Clintons, Hillary can walk around, toddle around, fly around to all these expensive venues, blame everybody else for all these. This is not simply a case of sloppiness. When you look at this, is an intentional, long-standing deception. It's a fraud on the American people, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Now, Charles, we heard that in 2016, that the Clintons shut down the Clinton Foundation. That's not exactly accurate, is it?
No. So what they did is that's when you go back to that FBI warning sign thing, what they shut down was something called, in theory, the Clinton Global Initiative. Now, I refer to that as the Clinton Grifters Initiative because, holding a party, they started out in New York where you spend $10 million, $10 million, gather, a whole bunch of current, former leaders, and then deal doers and vendors into a closed session where you brag about what you might do in theory, in the future that might be charitable, and then you give yourself, global citizen awards for, all the great works you've been doing. That is not charity. And the Clinton Foundation was never authorized for that purpose. It was solely authorized to be a presidential archive and research center in Little Rock. It never had the right to do what it started doing in 2005 in New York and elsewhere, calling it the Clinton Global Initiative, entering these crazy joint ventures, Clinton Global Initiative University, for which it was never authorized. So that's what they said they were going to shut down. And that, I think, stands at the center of the public corruption frauds that I hope are being investigated, this Uranium One and others. Many, you go to the Clinton website and you look at their lists of what they call commitments to action. You can search them. And I love to do, just for fun, you just pick any old name at random that you think is going to be questionable, put it in there and see how many fraudulent things you can find. I mean, there are some laugh-out-loud funny ones, frankly, in there. And the FBI, I hope, is taking a list of every single one of those commitments to action to find out what actually happened to them. Were they charitable? Were they legal? Was there any accounting? Did people derive illegal benefits? Were politicians paid off in this country or elsewhere? There's a laundry list. You could employ a large number of lawyers for decades going through all that stuff. And it's a testament to why you can't do charity in this way. You can't take politically grasping deal doers, mix them in a closed session with no oversight, and think that nothing bad is going to happen. A lot bad will happen.
Charles, what's kind of remarkable is to look for what is not said or what is not done, because people don't give it any attention because there's nothing, if it's not there. But I guess where I'm going with that statement is, isn't it curious that neither Bill nor Hillary ever talk about the presidential library in Arkansas?
Well, at this stage, I'm just guessing, they have, they are not the way they were in 2000, where they were basically bankrupt. They had no money. They had big debts. They have got a lot of money. And they've got a child, the grandchildren, and as a guest, some lawyers have gone to them and said, listen, you open your mouth, we can't help you. Best be quiet here. And so, you're in dangerous ground. I would point out, when I talk to people on situations like this, a lot of people say, well, nothing's happening. I don't know if you noticed that Nicolas Sarkozy was arrested.
Yes.
Okay. Now, he can be tied to these Clinton Foundation frauds.
Oh, swell. So we might have some interrogatories when it comes to Nicolas Sarkozy in Libya, correct?
It's not just Libya. So Nicolas Sarkozy became president, or whatever the right phrase is, of France in 2007, in May of 2007, precisely as the Clinton Foundation illegally began to source hundreds of millions of dollars from an entity called UNITAID, which was created at the instigation primarily of the government of France, with Sarkozy being centrally involved. Okay, he then was leader of the country as France became by far the largest donor through UNITAID to the Clinton Foundation, to the tune, in the early period, 2006 to 2009, UNITAID gave the Clinton Foundation about $300 million to fight HIV/AIDS, a purpose for which it was never lawfully organized. There's never been a valid accounting for that money. It appears to me as if hundreds of millions of dollars went missing at crucial periods as Hillary was trying to become the Democratic nominee. And what is very unfortunate for Mr. Sarkozy is, and good, I think, for us, In France, there's a special department of the government that is charged with investigating financial crimes. It is led by a very powerful woman named Eliane Houlette. Eliane Houlette, you can look her up, is somebody who stopped Mr. Fillon from being president of France, and instead Macron became president because of her investigation. She's investigating Google France. She's investigating the Paradise Papers. She's investigating Sarkozy. She's, and these people are rough, and they've been aggrieved here. And other governments around the world have started to notice. I've been asked, and it hasn't come together yet, but I've been asked to go over to brief people in Germany. I think the people in Canada, and England, and Australia, and Norway, and Korea, and many of these other large countries that have donated to these frauds are starting to be asked extremely tough questions. And now states as well, U.S. states are starting to say, look, if you guys aren't going to get this job done, we have to get, at the very least, the Clinton Foundation should not be allowed to solicit money. Its authority to solicit in every U.S. state should be suspended forthwith until a real accounting, a real audit is made of what actually happened from October 23, 1997 to the present. Only then should they have the ability, if they pass muster, to get back into the business of soliciting money. But on this interview, they're out there right now. The website's up, raising money, and fools are sending the money. And even, smart people apparently are still sending them money. It's got to stop.
It would be really quite remarkable that the French financial prosecutor would end up with documents and interrogatories on all frauds dealing with the Clintons, to the embarrassment of the FBI, who apparently has a office right there in Little Rock that's doing these investigations. So we really look like ostriches over here when it deals with the Clintons.
Well, see, what I think is the case, I hope is the case, is, and I only know a few people in the FBI. I had the great fortune of interacting with Robin Gritz, who got on the wrong side of McCabe and is a fine human being, great former FBI person. In the main, the overwhelming majority of people in the FBI, I'm guessing, are law and order folks, and nothing upsets them more than seeing dirty cops and maladministration of justice, gaming investigations. We should talk for a second about the email. And I want to make very clear that on this same FBI vault file, if you punch in Hillary or Clinton, there's a 19-part dump, thousands of pages. Look at dump 1 and dump 2. Dump 1, part 1, explains that an FBI investigation, full-bore, large investigation into mishandling of classified information by Hillary Clinton, began on July 10th, 2015. So well before McCabe's wife lost her bid to be a senator in Virginia, the FBI was actively investigating pursuant to a Section 811C request under the Intelligence Authorization Act of 1995. They had begun an investigation into mishandling. They ultimately discovered more than 2,000 instances of mishandling. 2,000.
Charles, we've come to the end of our time together, so it makes me angry that I didn't have you on sooner such that we could discuss this, but we'll pick this up at another time. But ladies and gentlemen, visit charlesortel.com. And thank you, Charles, for all of your hard work and being with us today.
Anytime, Denise. All the best.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here as we go into the final segment of the Denise Simon Experience. I got somebody with us that I think it's been a couple of years since that he was on the Denise Simon Experience, and that's Professor Andrew Pessin. The professor is he's an author of several academic articles and several books. He's a man who's very, very dedicated to what is going on college campuses in anti-Semitism. I hate how all this is festering, and it seems like California is probably the worst region. But Professor Andrew, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You've got a book that's about to hit the bookshelves, I think next month, if I'm not mistaken, Anti-Zionism on Campus, the University Free Speech and BDS, which is Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. It studies in anti-Semitism. But you can pre-order it on Amazon, I might add. So
at a very nice pre-publication discount right now. It's something like 25% off. So if you're the type of person who's going to get it anyway, now is a good time to get it.
Oh, good job. What motivated you, Professor, to write the book?
Well, I've been watching somewhat passively the way Israel has been treated on campuses for a good number of years now, at least 10 years. And by passively, I mean, like many people, I check the news every day, I read some headlines, occasionally click on a story, but I'm busy with my life, my job, my family, and so I see the things going on, I get sort of increasingly upset, and I don't particularly act in any way because life is busy. And in particular, in the fall of 2014, I read this story about Professor Doron Ben-Attar at Fordham University, who basically stood up against a BDS movement against Israel on his campus and was really badly persecuted simply for standing up and speaking out for Israel in that context. And I read this story in the fall of 2014, and I said, oh, that's really terrible the way he's been treated. And then I just clicked on the next story because that's, we all do that. And didn't think too much about it. But some months later, my own campus got interesting, and I won't say more about that, but And I began to realize as news media started reaching out to me and I started getting sort of emails of support from all around the world. Literally a petition Change.org petition went around the world several times, garnered 10,000 plus signatures. I began to realize how important it is to hear from people outside the campus. Campuses are like these little bubbles, and they can get really crazy around certain issues. I'm sure you're aware of that, right? And so when you're in that bubble, your whole worldview can get distorted and perverted in certain ways. And when I started hearing literally hundreds of emails from people around the world, I realized how important it is to sort of get outside the bubble, hear from people outside that bubble, and et cetera. So some months after I had read that story about Doron Ben-Attar, probably 6 months later, I emailed him very belatedly, and I said, I'm so sorry it took me this long. I read what happened to you. It was terrible. You have my support. Anything I can do to help, I'd be happy to. And he wrote back immediately saying, why don't we assemble a book of narratives by faculty members who've been on the receiving end of anti-Israel nastiness, bullying, intimidation, et cetera, on different campuses. And I said, sure, that sounds like an interesting project. And we put out a call for papers shortly thereafter, and almost immediately got something like 30 or 35 people, faculty members all around across the world, who wanted to tell their stories about what they had confronted on their campuses. So that's how the book began. It evolved from there, but that was the basic driving idea, was documenting the way that anti-Israel activists on campus intimidate and bully and break the rules and things like that. So that's the basic idea.
Professor, you were calling them bubbles, these campuses. I actually call them incubation centers.
That's like virus or bacteria.
Yes.
Yeah, right. That's nice.
And it just doesn't seem to let up. I mean, every once in a while you think, okay, you haven't heard anything about free Palestine or, blah, 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 blah. And then the next thing you know, here comes something else. It's almost like it's timed to do something.
Yeah. Well, it's important to have some context, which is the following. Part of what I've been doing over the last couple of years, I've also become the campus bureau editor for the Allgemeiner. The Allgemeiner is a news outlet that focuses on matters of concern to Jews and Israel-related things, and realizing that the campus scene had become very hot, they managed to start this sort of a dedicated bureau to covering the campus scene, and I was privileged to be invited to be the editor of that. So I've been doing that and keeping a close eye on the campuses. And one thing to keep in mind, this is the good news, is there are something like 4,000 accredited universities and colleges in the United States alone, and the vast majority of them are fine. Like, nothing terrible is going on, nothing crazy. They're not horrible incubators in the way, your very colorful phrase. The vast majority are fine, but of course we don't hear about that. That's not news. We only hear about the cases where stuff is going on. So that's the good news. The bad news is there still are a lot of campuses where stuff is going on. There are a lot of terrible, terrible places, and where these things go on, they're bad. They really are bad, and they do affect lots and lots of people. So in context, it's not everywhere, but where it is bad enough for sure.
In these essays that were submitted to you, do you find the essays that you received come from college campuses that have a large foreign student population and faculty population?
I don't know that I can answer that question. What I can say is our essays, the bulk are from North America, some United States and some Canada. We have several a couple from the United Kingdom. We have one from South Africa. We have one, or is it two, from Israel, and maybe one or two other places. So we've got them kind of around the world. And I know that at least we also have 6 sort of testimonials from students at different campuses, sharing their experience, what it's like to be confronted with the nastiness of the anti-Israel movement on their campuses. What I can tell you is a number of those essays, a number of those narratives do absolutely refer to essentially immigrant students as a source of the antagonism in their particular cases. So I don't know that I can generalize, but I do know that a few of our narratives do make reference to that.
were you, in receiving these submissions, Professor, were you rather stunned that the content of these conflicts that the faculty and or a handful of these students have not been more widely reported?
I was, and so the first thing that struck both Doron, my co-editor, and myself was just the quantity, that we got 30 to 35 of these within a few weeks. Was stunning, because again, you're aware of the big ones that hit the news, for obvious reasons. But the reality is, most campuses, going back to the bubble/incubator idea, most campuses are really kind of isolated from the world, and something goes on a campus, and it's mostly a local affair. And we were, seeing the perspective of our potential contributors here. People feel under attack. They typically feel very alone when they're under attack, and the world doesn't know. It's not that unless it's a really big one, which some of them are. The world doesn't know about it, and so most of these stories absolutely were under the radar. And in fact, my job in the Allgemeiner, part of what I do every day, is I spend some time sort of scouring the internet and various media looking for potential stories. And pretty much every day, at least during the academic year, I have somewhere between 8 and 12 relevant stories to sort of pitch and consider, of which the Allgemeiner typically can cover 2 to 3 a day at most, something like that. So now that I'm campus bureau editor, I see a lot more of what's going on, and it's a tremendous amount, but only a tiny fraction of it ever gets to larger media, certainly not to mainstream media. You almost never hear about them in mainstream media. So it's all happening, most of it's happening under the radar, which is really, really disturbing, because then it makes you wonder, with all this effort, I dug up a whole bunch of these stories, but where are all the stories I haven't heard about?
Yeah. Were you able to establish some other kind of common spirit in these submissions? In other words, are people referring to some key players or some key connective tissue that seems to be, the fuse on these campuses?
Yes, I can. What I will say, this particular book, our Anti-Zionism on Campus, it has a somewhat narrow focus, which is just documenting how the anti-Israel movement what it operates on campuses. Right? It's not about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This book isn't about defending Israel, although Israel, most of the contributors feel, is not treated fairly. But it's not about defending Israel. It's about documenting the movement on campus. And so with that said, a good number of our contributors are people, and this is the important point, are people who are maybe not particularly supportive of Israel themselves. They are very critical of Israel, critical of various policies, etc. Some of them are fairly active, I would say, supporters of the Palestinians. But what happens on many campuses is it's not enough to be critical of Israel unless you actually hate Israel and actively call for its destruction. You can be in the target of these movements. So it's not just, the arch Zionists who are being attacked by the anti-Israel movements. It's people who are, maybe let's call them very left-wing, progressive critics of Israel, but they don't absolutely hate it. They're not calling for Israel's destruction. They're calling for the two-state solution. But that's not good enough for these activists. It has to be, call to destroy Israel or you're in our sights. And to come back now to your specific question, there's no question that Students for Justice in Palestine as a national organization is the major source of activity of many of the problematic incidents. There are a number of campuses, so the groups don't always go by that name. So SJP is a national organization, has a bunch of individual chapters, but on some campuses the pro-Palestinian group doesn't have that name and has a different name, but invariably they're connected to SJP. So SJP is almost certainly the most common element in many of the problematic incidents that our book documents. Let me point to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
And SJP more or less has, in most of its chapters, certainly, it has this doctrine of anti-normalization, namely that if you're an activist for Students for Justice in Palestine, you cannot normalize the the Israeli voice or the pro-Israel voice on any campus, that means you can't have discussions, you can't have debates, you're not interested in having open and honest conversation with anybody. That means, for example, there's a whole bunch of the following incidents. There are, campuses, especially left-leaning, progressive campuses, have all sorts of social justice causes, and many Jewish students are attracted to these causes. But SJP makes it the case that, if you wanted to fight against racism in general, which is a very admirable cause, SJP will not allow, let's say, the local Hillel group to contribute to an anti-racism cause because that's normalizing students who maybe accept Israel, even when they're acting against racism. So this anti-normalization doctrine is incredibly pernicious, and it's really nothing short of anti-Semitism. It's just we have to exclude all Jews in any of our campus causes, no matter how noble, unless maybe they're willing to essentially sign a document that says, we disavow Israel and reject Israel's right to exist. So there's a lot of really terrible pressure on many Jewish students in many of these schools to disavow Israel just to participate in ordinary social life on a campus.
So it is really selective free speech that's permitted.
Oh, absolutely. From the SJP anti-normalization perspective, and this other buzzword is intersectionality, which is the idea, in my view, that you can blame the Jews for all the problems of the world. Yeah. But in this context, absolutely, anyone even presenting the Israeli perspective, they don't want to hear it. This is where you see in the news sometimes the shout downs and the disruptions. If an Israeli speaker or someone wanting to speak pro-Israel comes to a campus, and often they are shouted down and disrupted. Not even, you're welcome to exercise your own free speech to, you want to set up a table outside and hand out a pamphlet or hold up a sign, fine, but that's not good enough. What they want to do is not engage in a debate, not merely offer their perspective, but they want to silence the other perspective. And, as you said, selective free speech. And they'll do it in the name of free speech. But, there's this whole twisted justification of it because, you're in favor of free speech, they say, but of course, for genuinely free speech, you have to protect vulnerable people from hate speech. And then you classify anything supportive of Israel as hate speech, and so you can justify, get rid of it, but you're doing it not to suppress free speech, but to open the free speech of the oppressed and the victimized. So in the name of free speech, I kid you not, this is the reasoning. In the name of free speech, we need to limit free speech is essentially what we're seeing on many of the major campuses.
In these submissions and these essays, did any of them offer other enlightening, the money trail and or solutions to, these conflicts on campus?
These essays are not about the money trail. Maybe one or two people try to speculate, but that's sort of outside the scope. Who ultimately funds Students for Justice in Palestine is a very interesting question, but it's not one that our book addresses. As far as solutions, how to deal with campus, that's also difficult. Part of the reason is every campus is different. Every campus has its sort of unique situations and personalities, and what works on one campus doesn't always work on another campus. What is happening, and this is my view, the Jewish students and the ones, and as I'd like to say, the ones who don't hate Israel, right? Again, you don't have to be an arch Israel supporter. You just have to, as long as you don't hate Israel, you're a problem. So the ones who don't hate Israel have been playing really defense for a good number of years now. And what I mean by that is the activists are the pro-Palestinian groups such as SJP, and they're the ones that are drafting student government resolutions to boycott Israel, the BDS resolutions, etc. And then the Jewish students, or rather more generally the not Israel-hating students, are always sort of caught unprepared, and then they come at the last minute to these student government meetings and they're in the position of saying, we're not terrible, we're not evil, and it's a defensive posture. And what you have on campuses, you've got young, impressionable people. Colleges, university experience is a great place to experiment with, different ideas and different personalities. You're young and being formed, but you have many students who just want to find a cause. And if you have a sort of, let's say, a neutral student who's very impressionable, and they look at the anger and the passion of the anti-Israel activists who are on the march, aggressive, and then they look at kind of the passive, underprepared, very defensive pro-Israel side. Many of them are just going to be attracted to the spirit of the activist movement, as opposed to, be attracted to needing to defend yourself in the court of law, so to speak, in the court of college public opinion. So that's how it's been, I think, for a good long time. But I do think it's changing. I think over the last 5 years, the non-Israel hating crowd has begun to realize that they have to be proactive rather than reactive. We're starting to see a handful now of student governments entertaining just pro-Israel resolutions supportive of Israel. That's a brand new phenomenon. There's a new grassroots movement called Students Supporting Israel, which started at the University of Minnesota, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, and now has a good number of chapters, many dozens of chapters, and is growing. And they're all about taking the initiative, telling the positive story of Israel, and they're also not afraid, and this is the crucial thing, they're not afraid to be critical of the Palestinians or the Palestinian leadership. They will occasionally bring in speakers who can say some harsh things about the Palestinians, and that's something the pro-Israel side has just shied away from. So, the anti-Israel side has no trouble rebuking, criticizing, condemning everything Israel and Israelis do, and then the pro-Israel side has to say, we're not so bad, and we do some good things too. But what we haven't seen is many people willing to say, by the way, the Palestinians have some problematic behaviors themselves. Let's put them on trial for a change. So that's just beginning to shift a little bit now, and I think that just as a practical strategy is a really important shift.
Professor, we seem to, in college campuses across the country, we have these specific schools of study. We have, Arab Islamic studies, over here at this university system, and then we have, some other kind of Asia studies and whatnot. But we never seem to have anything that is historically a syllabus of studies when it comes to Israel in history, do we?
So that's also changing. That's a great question. So, and in fact, just this past weekend, I went to Brandeis University, where they were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, which was essentially the first center for Israel studies on campus. It's done a whole bunch of programs training faculty. I participated in one last summer, as a matter of fact, where they're trying to basically plant seeds of Israel studies at other campuses, and it's growing. So there are a number of centers of Israel studies now, and they've now trained, I think the number is just passing 300 faculty members at different schools around the world, mostly North America, but also internationally. Faculty members training them to be able to teach Israel as an academic subject. The idea is not officially to be an advocate for Israel, because it's supposed to be a scholarly organization.
Sure.
But the reality is the anti-Israel activists trade so heavily on lies and slanders and defamation, merely presenting truth, scholarly objective truth amounts to a form of advocacy, because it's responding to the incredible amount of disinformation that floats around here. So that's underway too, and the Schusterman Foundation has done a wonderful job supporting this, and Brandeis, as an academic program, has done some really, really wonderful work there. So we are absolutely seeing that. A point that connects to what you were just saying, though, over the last couple of decades, Middle East studies is a major academic field, and there are quite a few programs in Middle East studies. But at this stage now, certainly over the last 10 years, Middle East studies in general excludes Israel. They don't consider, these academics do not include Israel as part of Middle East studies, and Middle East studies organizations, the Association for Middle East Studies, Middle East Studies Association, can't remember the name now, but they just changed this is the professional organization for people who are scholars of the Middle East. Just this past year, change their organizational bylaws essentially to allow them to undertake political activism because they just can't wait to start condemning Israel. So what they've done is essentially push out and expel anyone who's sympathetic to Israel in Middle East studies, and now the professional organization itself is poised to just officially become an advocacy organization. So it's a serious problem, but fortunately, at least the Schusterman Foundation is pushing back and creating some Israel studies scholars to be able to speak up and answer back. But we are in the minority, so it's a big battle.
Professor Andrew Pessin, his book is Anti-Zionism on Campus, the University Free Speech and BDS Studies in Anti-Semitism. Pre-order at a discount rate on Amazon. Professor, I want to thank you for this because I'm glad that you tackled this, and I hope that there are some people that are included in these essays or conditions that they know that they were part of that are embarrassed, and that some of these college campuses, I read a study earlier that I think there was probably 60 campuses where there had been some kind of anti-Zionism things going on, that I think people might be a little bit more introspective, and I think you've done some real remarkable work here in this book. So I invite everybody to check it out, please. Anti-Zionism on Campus. And I wish you a lot of good luck with this. I have a feeling that when it comes out, you might have to do volume 2, Professor.
We've been collecting further ones since we submitted this manuscript, which is already almost a year ago. So, yeah, there will be room for volume 2, I regret to say. But
I think it's a good thing.
No, the battle has been joined. That's the way I look at it now.
Yeah.
The not Israel-hating side, the pro-Israel crowd, has awakened over the last 5 years, and they're responding. And I think there are some positive developments. So I'm actually feeling somewhat hopeful and optimistic, at least on the campus front. And we hope our book will help contribute to that by simply documenting what's going on for many people. I don't know if any of the the protagonist activists will feel a sense of shame, as you mentioned, or feel sorry. They tend to feel very proud of what they've done, and they don't see it as wrong. And in those strange empathetic moments, I can get it, because if you think Hitler is coming, then you will break every rule to try to protest it. And they think Israel is Hitler, So,
Indeed.
They're passionate, and they're not ashamed to really break the rules of the campus environment to fight against this thing. The problem is, of course, they're profoundly misinformed. That's really the problem. And,
good luck, Professor. Good luck with this book, and thanks so much for your time. And look forward to speaking with you again real soon.